Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Welcome, friends. In this thread, we share anything related to an abduction experience. My wife and I had a weird experience, something I was more curious about than her at the time. We lived in Tennessee and we were really poor, so we slept on a memory foam mat on the floor in our living room. We later upgraded to a futon, but that's not really important. I always slept on the left side, next to a coffee table we had, and one night I woke up really uneasy. I remember seeing what looked like a red laser pointer beam, that's the best I can describe it, darting side to side really fast on the side of the table, as it was very low to the ground. It is important to note I had my back turned to my wife, which was also the source of the light, and I was so tired and out of it that I really didn't think too much of it. I just remember waking up and seeing it and thinking how weird it was as I fell back asleep. A couple hours later, I woke up laying flat on my back. I opened my eyes and just felt awake. It had to be 3 or 4 in the morning. I felt uneasy and didn't like how I just woke up suddenly feeling so alert. Then within a minute of me waking up, my wife creepily just sits straight up from being in a dead sleep. The issue I have with this is how she sat up. It was so fast, and her body didn't move naturally. I tried to recreate her movement, and couldn't do it. She didn't bend or curl her back like a normal person would while using their abdomen to sit up. She stayed flat and just sat up all unnaturally. I immediately rubbed her back after this happened and just started saying, "It's okay, babe, you were just dreaming, you're fine." The thing that bothers me is how I didn't feel fine when she did that, and I was almost telling myself that it was okay. I was just really uneasy that night. The next morning, I was telling my wife what happened, as she didn't remember, and she explained what she was dreaming about. She told me in her dream she was on an operating table where entities had abducted her and were getting ready to cut into her.
Hi, when I was about 4 or 5 and subsequently until I was 11, I slept in my bed which had the window above the headboard. I can't tell you how many times this experience happened, but I would wake up in the night. Immediately terrified, I would look up and in my field of vision, a tiny dot of light would fly in from the left into the sky through the window. It would stop dead and by this time I'd be freaked out. I would freeze and that's when they would appear. Either they would be suddenly around me tickling or grabbing me or they would float outside the window. I thought they were ghosts. They were just odd and would freak me out. As time went on, I realized that I could run to the end of the bedroom or even downstairs before they would get me. Usually it felt like something was pulling me back into my room, and I'd claw myself downstairs hoping my folks would be sitting in the living room. Sometimes they would, other times they wouldn't. I'd be screaming at them and they would be blank, staring at a blank or fuzzy TV screen. They would float along the floor toward me, sometimes looking like ghosts, other times I would see a devil. But ultimately, they'd get me. The next bit is odd. I don't recall being taken out of the house, but pulling was involved. I would suddenly be in a dark corridor being taken into a large, and I mean enormous cylindrical room. In the center would be an illuminated podium and a larger being. I would call her the witch and she would look down at me. Her job was to ask me 3 questions, but I never managed to answer her questions and all of a sudden, the floor beneath would drop. I would wake up with a jolt in bed. Sounds far-fetched, but when my brother and dad cleared the loft, they found an old school workbook from when I was 6, 1988 for context. Inside was the story, written crudely and an illustration with what is clearly a UFO and a gray. I get shivers thinking about it. A written account of a nightmare experience I had repeatedly between the ages of 4 or 5 until 11. Some nightmares. One night I went to bed and some ghost started to tickle me. I ran downstairs, but they caught me. There was a hatch in my bed, so they took me down it. I had to answer 3 questions right, but I got them wrong, so they threw me down the hatch. I landed in my bed that morning. The illustration which accompanied the nightmare experience account. Notice the bright glow around the window, the bright object in the window, the black-eyed creature peering in, and the springs above the bed at the top of the image. Written in 1988.
I've had aliens communicate with me 3 times, and one other time, a physical contact. They communicate telepathically, which is very, very different from what most people think telepathic communication is. It's both a medium and a language, so it's not like you just hear a voice in your head at all. But, like sound, it is proximal, so they need to be close to communicate with you. I was never completely certain what they wanted from me. They stopped attempting communication when my first child was born. Feel free to ask questions, and I will do my best to answer from my experiences.
I was toying around with the idea lately that maybe aliens use telepathy as a kind of infinite language tool to bridge the gap between who knows how many different alien species. It would make sense. I doubt it would even have to be something that the species would have to be born with. If possible, maybe they create a machine that does it.
I don't think I even considered a machine. Odd. I believe, however, that the beings that tried to communicate with me did not use verbal language. This is why I think telepathy is much different than what people think. I got the sense that they use a kind of telepathic shared experience. Just to put it in human terms, I can tell you to think of the Washington Monument. And, just now, you had a thought, which was likely some mental image of the Washington Monument. However, the details of that mental image I can only infer. It may be a recollection of a time you saw it in person, or in a picture in a magazine. It may have been at night or on a sunny day. With telepathic shared experience, I can place a specific thought in your head, so I know precisely what you mentally saw. So, rather than me having to tell you a story about an event that happened to me, I can simply transmit the actual memory that I have into your brain. That is my explanation of how telepathy works.
20 years ago, my best friend and I had a strange experience on our way home from a neighboring town. The best I can explain it, we got stuck in a weird memory loop where we'd reach a stop sign, fully aware of where we were, make the appropriate turns, and still end up back at the same stop sign over and over again. Our reaction to it was even off, more dreamlike than how you'd imagine yourself reacting to a situation that is clearly not normal. We just continued to mechanically go through the motions, making the same turns at least 4 times. On one of the trips across a bridge along the route, we both commented on some strange lights that seemed to be coming up from underneath it. Eventually, we arrived at the highway we'd been trying to reach, only we were nowhere near where we should have been and had lost somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 hours worth of time. The following day, we both woke up with pink eye, which was weird because I'd never had it once in my whole life, despite having worn contact lenses for years. Later, I learned that's a frequently reported ailment among people who've had some sort of encounter. Actinic conjunctivitis is an inflammation of the eye contracted from prolonged exposure to actinic, ultraviolet, rays. Symptoms are redness and swelling of the eyes. Most often the condition is caused by prolonged exposure to Klieg lights, therapeutic lamps, or acetylene torches. Conjunctivitis eye condition contracted from exposure to actinic rays. Symptoms are redness and swelling. Conjunctivitis is prevalent among children of the highlands of Ecuador. The finding supports the hypothesis that prolonged exposure to the sun at altitude, in the less dense atmosphere, with the resultant lower UV absorption, is one cause of the condition.
Lost time is certainly how you know they came to you, only you didn't know it. My rough theory is that from within a proximity, using either their tech or minds, they put you in an extremely vivid dreamlike state while they do whatever they want to do to you. All the while you think you're still in the car. It's crazy.
I've thought about trying regression hypnosis, but 2 things stop me. 1, I'm so familiar with the subject matter I'd be a prime candidate for confabulation. 2, I'm not sure I want to know. Roughly 10 years after that happened, I either rejected an implant or a tiny, glassy lozenge, about a 1/4 inch long, that had somehow got embedded between my spine and right scapula deep enough to have become encysted. I saved it in a pill bottle thinking I'd find some way to get it analyzed. 2 days later, the same friend from the car ride was over at my house, and when I went to get it to show it to him, it was gone.
Southwestern here. I've had 4 close encounters, 3 first kinds, and 1 second kind. My parents live exactly 175 miles due east of Area 51 in Utah. It's a relatively small town, no streetlights so the sky is clearly visible. I've seen a lot of floating lights and incredible aerial activity over the years. Most of the activity is from a great distance away, or at least it appears to be. Most of the people in my parents' community have had similar experiences, if not weirder. I had an experience when I was about 16, 7 years ago, that literally shook me to my core. My parents live on about 1.5 acres of property, and so do most of my neighbors. We get buzzed by fighter pilots a lot, but I think they're primarily from Nellis Air Force Base. Anyway, I was up late, around 2 or 3 a.m. watching a thunderstorm come through when, for about 10 or 15 seconds, my parents' entire property was bathed in a bluish light. I don't really know how to explain the color, but it was like a fluorescent indigo blue color. I was on the phone with a girl, and the call was subsequently dropped on a landline. It was weird because the light had a distinct boundary. Like, it wasn't flooding the entire vicinity. It also appeared to be coming from above. I also think this is interesting, because I was probably one of very few people awake at this hour. All of my neighbors are largely of retirement age, and would not likely be up watching the storm like some punk kid. Has anyone else had a similar experience? It freaked me out. It was so bright it made it look like it was daytime outside. I thought, at first, someone was shining a floodlight into my parents' house. I can't attest to any experience of time loss, but the phone call being dropped was pretty freaky.
Most positive this was a dream, but it still spooked me. In the dream, I was letting my dog out to go to the bathroom. It was late at night, so the only lights that were on were the porch lights. My dog is older and has poor eyesight, so he wasn't realizing that he was wandering away from the light. I went to pick him up at the end of the driveway, and that's when I saw an extremely bright light in the sky. I knew the second I saw it something was wrong. I turned to run back into my house, but then I feel a hand tug my arm. A tall alien with leathery brown skin and a huge bug-like creature was holding me. At this point, my heart was beating like crazy and I tried to jerk it out of its grip. It was no use, so I looked behind me and I saw another one coming from my backyard. Before I woke up in my bed, I remember that I kept on begging in my mind for them not to harm my dog.
Hawaii douchebag reporting in. So when I was little, I was scared of everything. I didn't use the bathroom by myself at night until I was 13, and I peed my bed and myself in public even in my high school years. My story is long and jumbled, but I'll do my best. Until I was about 15, I had to have a stuffed animal surrounding every inch of my bed and multiple blankets tucked underneath me so that, nothing could get underneath them. My mom told me that I was a disturbed baby. Never ever slept through the night. Again, not until I was in high school did I sleep through the night. Be about 6 or 7. Mom shuts off light. Don't remember much. Wake up, lights are on. WTF. All of a sudden feel very frightened. Try to scream for mom. Nothing comes out. Try to scream, but nothing. Floating Jack in the Box comes floating around the corner. Try screaming even harder. I pass out. I was wide awake. I'm 200% positive that I wasn't dreaming. Hallucinating maybe, but I wasn't asleep or half asleep. So basically I screamed for my mom pretty much every night until about 14 years of age. I have a lot of fear, especially mirrors. My dad is a pastor and thinks I'm suffering from a haunting. Does everything he can, but nothing helps. He decides to just pretend that these things don't happen. So fast forward through the years. I have bad dreams every night still, even though I am able to muster the courage to take myself to the bathroom at night now. Be a junior in high school. Have to wait late at school for my parents every day. Decide that being alone at school that day is rather uncomfortable, so I start walking to my mom's work. Sky looks dark, practically black. Better hurry. I'm literally down the street from mom's work now. I suddenly feel like crap. It starts pouring. I lay down under the pavilion outside of a real estate agency on the same road as mom's work. Next thing I know, my mom is standing over me asking if I'm okay. I've peed myself and I've got the worst headache of my life. Mom and I never speak of it again. Be my senior year. Waiting at school in the outdoor lunch area. Not a soul at the school. Start to feel like I'm being watched. Too scared to get up and walk away. 2 hours later, it's almost dark. Mom calls phone. No memory of what happened. Be my sophomore year in college. Chemistry teacher wants my booty. Gives me an expensive telescope because whatever. Just brings it into class one day and gives it to me. Leave it in my room for months. Decide to take it out for a try. It's about 9:30, clear night. Out in the driveway. Can see my parents watching a movie in the second-story living room. I've been out for maybe an hour, maybe a little more. Notice cars stop passing me on the highway. There are always cars on the highway. Silence. A disc passes following the highway and going north. It was low to the ground, but pretty large. Diameter was about the length of the 4-lane highway, including the median. It doesn't stop, it just keeps going. I wasn't afraid until I considered following it. When I thought about taking out my phone, I couldn't move my body, and the only thought in my head was don't you dare. It's gone, out of sight now. Go inside. I want to tell my parents, but scared of what they'll say. Tell my mom the next day. She told me never to tell her anything like that ever again. Back to high school for a moment. I used to have these terrible nightmares in my sophomore through the beginning of my senior year. More terrible than my usual nightmares. I would be almost asleep, and then I felt as though I was surrounded. I would swear that it was. Then I would feel hands pushing me around and grabbing at my blanket, torturing me. I would cry, but neither my parents nor my older brother across the hall would hear me. Every night for almost 2 years these nightmares would become so intense, and when they would peak, the fire alarm would go off and wake everyone up. My dad tried having the wiring checked, replacing the batteries, replacing the alarm, but nothing worked. Eventually my parents, once again, resolved to ignore everything. I told my dad about my dreams, and he accused me of making the fire alarm go off on my own with my spiritual warfare with demons. Life has gotten easier now. I'm around the corner from graduating from college. It's been a trip.
Yeah, I was abducted once a long time ago. Seems like I was simply lifted off my bed into a bright white light and whoosh I was out of my window into the spaceship. My eyes could barely see anything since it was so bright, literally lights everywhere, and these two ugly-looking bastards trying to look over me on some operating table and telepathically tell me I'm in safe hands. Woke up later without my pajamas outside and hurried home. The spaceship simply vanished into thin air. I don't even talk about it since naturally anyone who has not experienced such phenomena would think you are totally crazy, and this is to be expected. Needless to say, years later in some research I found this to be another one of the devil's tricks in his massive deception campaign for the end times.
Not even an abduction and possibly not even paranormal, but here you go. Be me, on vacation in hometown. 11 p.m., playing Street Fighter with a buddy at my mom's house. Blazing in my room. Dog starts to act very strange. He is just standing right next to the wall, staring at it like a statue. Won't move even if we call him. Go outside to smoke. The night is insanely bright for being 11 p.m. Huge cloud in the sky that's constantly flickering with blue and orange lightning. It's far closer to the ground and more cumulus shaped than any other cloud. Dog suddenly starts barking from inside. Wakes my mom, whose door opens. We rapidly put out the joint and open the door so we can pretend we were just outside playing with the dog. His story is obviously BS cause he was inside when he woke my mom up. She doesn't seem to care. Despite being a very grouchy lady who doesn't like being woken up, my mom is acting weirdly ditzy and cheerful. Follows us to my room and so does the dog. I'm now praying she won't smell the weed. She doesn't notice the obvious smell. Still acting strangely trance-like and silly. Keeps commenting on how big my friend has gotten since we were kids, marveling at how strange his fight stick looks. Eventually goes to bed. My friend and I go out again later to finish our joint. The flashing cloud formation is gone and the night seems very normal. My dog is back to normal. My mom is asleep. There are reasonable explanations for all of this. Texas has strange weather during the spring and I've definitely seen some bizarre clouds in my time. My mom, I later learned, had recently started on antidepressants. And my dog was probably just high. Still though, a weird night.
Hello and good morning, my fellow anons. I just witnessed my first UFO close to 2 hours ago now. Well, I have 95% of the time only been a lurker here on X, but now I actually got something to share with you anons. Feel free to ask whatever you want, but I will try to tell you everything I have while it's still fresh. It happened roughly about 2 hours ago now while I was on my way home walking. The time was about 4 a.m., almost 5 maybe. I first noticed that the street lights started flickering a bit and then shut off and then got turned on again with maybe 2 or 3 seconds apart. I thought nothing of it because it's pretty normal in the morning that they are acting up when the morning light is coming up. But then I saw this black round disc-shaped object flying above me. It had this donut-shaped hole in the middle of it. I'm not sure if the hole was hollow or if it was a hole-shaped dent in the middle of it. It moved too fast for me to be sure. It moved faster than any plane I have ever seen and also without sound. It moved somewhat straight forward, but the object almost wobbled right to left while doing so. It was visible for only 5 or 6 seconds max before it just disappeared. It moved towards the direction I was going, which was a very small wooded area before some more houses again. I suddenly got this weird feeling of danger while I took my first steps forward towards the area after my initial feeling of just pure excitement and joy. It was this very instinctive feeling that took over as if I should not go there or something bad would happen. I am not easily spooked at all and I trust it fully those few times it has happened to me. I don't know what else I can tell you about my sighting. I live in Sweden around the Stockholm area. I googled some common UFO shapes and this was the one closest I found. It was seen in Kagsund, Norway 1963.
Well, I must have been between the age of 4 or 6 years old. I was awakened in the middle of the night by 3 small creatures that I later identified while being older to be elves. They were looking around in my room. I had this mid-sized blue plastic chest that I had all my go-go's, small plastic aliens and my glass marbles in. 2 of them were going through that chest. The third one, I honestly can't remember what he was doing. Let's say that he was an underpants gnome and was going through my underwear. I simply stared at them for a short moment that must have been only 40 seconds to a 1 minute that felt way longer. I felt really uneasy about what was going on, but I became really upset over the fact that they were going through my chest. Everything in that chest was the most precious item in the world to me. So I took all the courage I had in my life and threw one of my 2 pillows right at the 2 elves by my chest. It landed right behind them and barely touched them. They turned around and I stood up with my other pillow in my hands and swinging it around in the air while keeping my distance in my bed. I was barely looking at them at that moment of my heroic defense of my chest, but I can clearly remember their silhouettes but not how they reacted to me. But it took no longer than maybe 10 or 15 seconds and they were gone. I just kept standing there for a while after they disappeared in shock and screamed for my mom. I'm still told to this day that it was a bad dream. I was fully awake.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.